The plains of the southwest were quiet that morning, filled with the cool breath of early dawn. A faint mist lay across the open land, drifting low between the mesquite trees and red rocks. Jacob Turner, known across the county as the lonely rancher who kept mostly to himself, rose before the sun as he always did, beginning his day with a silent prayer. He saddled his horse Chance, tightened the worn leather straps, and rode out toward the far end of his property where the cattle sometimes wandered too close to the canyon ridge. Jacob had grown used to the silence. 3 years earlier, he had buried the last member of his family, his younger brother, leaving him alone on an expanse of land far too large for one man. His neighbors knew him as hardworking, honest, and God-fearing, but few truly knew him. He preferred solitude over conversation, scripture over small talk, and work over worry. Yet even a man who builds walls around his heart can have them shaken when destiny crosses his path unexpectedly. The sun had barely begun to rise when Jacob noticed something unusual in the distance, a shape that did not belong to the branches of the old juniper trees. He narrowed his eyes, pulling his horse to a halt. A bit of cloth fluttered in the breeze. Someone, was suspended from a low branch. Jacob felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He urged Chance forward, praying silently that his fear was wrong. As he approached, his breath caught. A young Apache girl, maybe 13 or 14, was tied upright against the trunk, her hands bound but her feet touching the ground, as though someone had staged the scene with cruel intention. Above her, a wooden plank hung by a frayed rope. On it were carved the words, "White man don't forgive." Jacob dismounted instantly. The girl's eyes were half closed from exhaustion, not unconscious but close. She looked frightened, weak, but alive. Her dark braids were dusty, her clothing torn at the sleeve, and her face carried the quiet strength of someone who had endured more than she should have. Jacob cut the ropes quickly, lowering her gently into his arms. "It's all right," he said softly, unsure whether she understood English. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The girl took a trembling breath but did not speak. She looked around as if expecting someone to leap from the brush, whoever had left her there, whoever had intended for her to be found as a warning or a provocation. But the plains were still. Jacob lifted her onto his horse and rode back toward the ranch, glancing behind him every few moments. He knew enough about local tensions to understand the danger. Some settlers in the region held resentment toward Apache tribes, and some Apache warriors distrusted settlers even more deeply. It didn't take much to spark conflict. Whoever staged this act had wanted to stir anger, fear, revenge. Back at the ranch, he carried the girl inside, laying her on the guest cot. He prepared warm water, tore strips of cloth, and tended to the rope burns on her wrists. She watched him cautiously, her dark eyes following every move, trying to decide whether this stranger was an enemy or a protector. "My name is Jacob," he said gently. "I won't harm you, I promise." She remained silent for a long time, but her breathing slowed, no longer panicked. When he offered her water, she took it with trembling hands. For a moment he thought he saw gratitude flicker in her eyes, but it quickly vanished beneath layers of fear. As the day passed, Jacob kept his distance, letting her rest. He worked nearby, chopping firewood, feeding the animals, keeping the kitchen warm so she would feel some sense of safety. In the evening, she finally spoke. "Name, Noya," she whispered softly. Jacob paused, surprised. "Noya," he repeated with a respectful nod. "That's a strong name." She looked down at her hands. "Bad men took me. Not my people." Jacob's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much. Someone, neither settler nor Apache, wanted to ignite hostility between both sides, using a vulnerable child as fuel. It was cruel, calculated, and dangerous. "You're safe here," he said again. "No one will touch you." For the first time, she met his gaze without fear. That night was restless. Jacob stayed awake, sitting in a chair near the door with his rifle beside him, not to defend himself, but to protect the girl. Wind scraped the shutters, coyotes howled in the distance, but nothing approached the ranch. Still, his instincts told him trouble wasn't far. At dawn, he prepared food and placed a plate near her bedside. She ate slowly, cautiously, as though still unsure if she imagined the safety around her. When she finished, Jacob asked the question that had been weighing on him. "Do you know where your family is? Your tribe?" She shook her head. "We were traveling, men came in dark. I ran. They took me." Jacob exhaled quietly. Bringing her home to her people would not be easy. The Apache territories stretched wide across the region, and some groups did not welcome outsiders. But leaving her alone was not an option. God had placed her in his path for a reason, and he felt a responsibility deeper than duty, something spiritual, something guiding. Later that morning, Jacob saddled 2 horses. When Noah stepped outside, she froze, fear creeping into her expression. "We need to find your people," Jacob explained gently. "But I know it's dangerous for you out there alone. I'll ride with you. I'll make sure no one harms you." She hesitated, glancing at the open land, then back at him. "You help. Why?" Jacob looked toward the horizon. "Because you're a child of God. And no one deserves what was done to you." Her expression softened. Not trust yet, but the beginnings of it. As they rode across the plains, Jacob kept watch for tracks, smoke signals, or signs of a camp. Noah guided him with small gestures, pointing toward a familiar ridge, a canyon she recognized, a stream her people often crossed. Hours passed beneath the burning sun. By afternoon, they found signs, fresh footprints, scattered ashes from a fire, broken branches. Noah's eyes brightened with hope. But hope quickly transformed into fear when distant voices echoed between the rocks. Apache scouts emerged from behind the boulders, bows drawn, eyes sharp. Jacob raised his hands. "I bring the girl. She was taken by criminals, not settlers. I found her tied to a tree." The men exchanged glances, lowering their weapons slightly. One of them, older, with lines of wisdom etched across his face, stepped forward. Noah ran to him, and he embraced her with relief and grief mixed. Jacob let out a breath he had been holding. The leader approached Jacob slowly. "You helped our child," he said in accented English. "Few would risk themselves in these lands." Jacob nodded respectfully. She needed help. That was enough. The older man studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. It was an offering not just of gratitude but of fragile peace. "You are welcome among us today." Jacob followed them to their camp, where Noah's mother wept with relief upon seeing her daughter alive. They thanked Jacob with gifts, food, blankets, handcrafted ornaments, but he declined everything except a small beaded charm Noah pressed into his hand. "For protection," she whispered. Jacob smiled. "I'll keep it." Before he left, the tribe leader spoke again. "There are men stirring hatred. They want war between our people and yours. Be watchful. They may return." "I will," Jacob promised. As he rode away, he looked back once. Noah stood near her mother, waving. Joy filled Jacob's chest in a way he hadn't felt in years, not the joy of reward but the peace that comes from doing what is right. But peace in the region was fragile. 2 days later, as Jacob tended to his cattle, he noticed dust rising from the west, riders approaching fast. His heart thudded. He grabbed his rifle but held it low, prepared but not desperate. 3 riders stopped at his fence line. Rough men with hardened expressions. "You been sticking your nose where it don't belong, Turner," the leader growled. That girl was meant to deliver a message. Jacob kept his voice steady. "A message meant to cause bloodshed. You won't use children for your hate." One of the men spat. "We'll use whatever we need. And if we have to silence you to keep things going our way, we will." Jacob's grip tightened, but he kept the barrel pointed at the ground. Inside, he whispered the prayer he always carried. "Lord, guide my words. Spare me from violence unless there is no other way." "You're trespassing," he said calmly. "Leave now. I won't warn you again." The leader smirked. "Or what? You'll shoot." Jacob didn't answer. His silence was stronger than a threat. The men exchanged uneasy looks. Something in Jacob's eyes, steady, unwavering, righteous, made them shift in their saddles. "This ain't over," the leader spat. They turned and rode off. Jacob exhaled heavily, thanking God the confrontation had ended without bloodshed. Days passed, and word eventually reached the settlements. An Apache group had captured a band of criminals, the same men who had kidnapped Noah to ignite conflict. The tribes had handed them over to frontier lawmen. Justice, long overdue, had arrived. News spread that Jacob Turner, the lonely rancher, had risked his safety to save an innocent girl. Neighbors who once viewed him as a distant, private man now saw something different: courage, compassion, and moral strength. Some came to thank him personally. Others offered help maintaining his ranch. Doors once closed to him began to open. One quiet evening, as Jacob stood outside watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson, he felt something shift within him. A sense of purpose long dormant had awakened. He realized he wasn't meant to live an isolated life. God had placed him on that path to bring light to a dark moment, to build bridges instead of walls, to remind others that forgiveness and kindness could overcome even the deepest divides. A soft breeze carried the faint echo of children laughing from a distant Apache camp. Jacob smiled, holding the small beaded charm Noya had given him. It glowed in the warm fading light. He whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for guiding me that morning." And in the quiet stillness of the plains, he felt the certainty that his days of loneliness were ending. He had found community, purpose, and peace, not through seeking, but through serving. The land stretched before him wide and open, no longer a reminder of solitude but of possibility. Somewhere out there, people of different worlds were learning, slowly and painfully, to live in peace. And Jacob Turner, once just a lonely rancher, had become a small but meaningful part of that change. He mounted his horse, riding toward the horizon, not with the burden of isolation but with the strength of a renewed spirit. The world was vast, and God's plans even larger. And Jacob knew now that purpose could be found in the most unexpected places, even hanging from an old juniper tree, written on a cruel wooden sign. What others meant for division, God had turned into unity. What they meant for fear, God had turned into courage. And what they meant for hatred, God had turned into hope. Jacob whispered a final prayer as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Let me always choose the path of mercy. And the plains, silent and endless, carried his words into the evening air.